just wanted to touch on one other consideration, which is something that you referred to earlier, which is unity within the ANC. And a lot of the press around this subject has died down post the previous elective conference because, the Ramaphosa faction sort of seemed to get a lot more support in the NEC than they had in the 2018 election when he was originally elected with a very small majority. What are the ramifications for the ANC internally of entering into an EFF coalition?
Yeah, the internal ramifications are deeply destructive because you would drive out the last of the reform-minded individuals because they wouldn't be able to. They're good and decent people that have stuck it out. You drive them out and you'd set yourself off on this destructive trajectory where you would almost immediately, given the shocks to sentiment in the country, which translates into investment and growth and almost directly into living standards and job creation, the polls, I'm very confident, would immediately show that the declining ANC support is now going into a dive. And as the prospects of defeat and what's necessary to evade it become more apparent, the likely development inside the ANC is that the last turn inwards on each other and the institution falls away. And a way perhaps to think about it, a story I used to start a lot of briefings with is if anyone is old enough to remember that in August of 1985, if you weren't around, it's the end of the apartheid era. The country is in chaos and conflict. Growth is nowhere. The American banking group Chase Manhattan won't extend the loans. It's bankrupt. White conscripts are fighting black kids in townships, and there are wars on the frontline states. Quite the horrors of Gaza, but not far off. And if you'd at that moment said, I think what's actually going to happen here is that within a decade, the last leader of the National Party will be the tourism minister in an ANC government that will take the country to its first budget surplus since the formation of the Union, and economic growth rates back to 5%, which for 4 consecutive years it hadn't happened since the first half of the 1960s. People would have thought that's very difficult to go along with. Now, in this kind of work, there are a lot of examples of that nature. If you'd stood in the mall in Washington when Mr. Obama made his speech and said, yes, we can, and turned to your friend and said, it's really interesting what's happened, but I think Donald Trump will probably be the next man to stand there, that also have thought it's very difficult to happen. And then when he departed, there were a lot of Democrats who thought they probably wouldn't see him again, and the Republican primaries are suggesting we might be revisited by Mr. Trump. The importance of all those stories, and apply to South Africa too, is do not be bold sometimes in your thinking of what the little nascent trends, if they continue uninterrupted, lead you to as a future society. And in our case, again, to say it for the 5th time, but it's very important, is our political system is actually working to give us the prospect of peaceful change, unlike the majority of emerging markets before us that had to fight with rifles in the streets. Public opinion is immensely moderate and centrist. I mean, half of ANC voters hope that the opposition will get together to depose the ANC. I mean, it's extraordinary to think that you get to this point. If you take just, and the immense potential of the country beyond that, if it's not abused and looted, what simply happens. And therefore, it's not off in this moment to, and I'd advise you, hedge yourself on South Africa. This is not assured. Do not go home and be complacent and think, well, it's all going to be wonderful. But we've been dealt a hand now that gives me the sense that the longer-term outlook for the country is perhaps better than it's been at any point in the past 10 years.